The arrival. The gleaming spires of the Galactic University of Sciences pierced the lavender sky of Centauri Prime, their crystalline surfaces refracting the light of the system's twin suns. Inside the Grand Hall, Dean Zorlax nervously adjusted his ceremonial robes, his four eyes blinking in rapid succession as he addressed the assembled faculty. "Esteemed colleagues," Zorlax began, his voice quavering slightly. "As you know, our institution prides itself on cultural exchange and interspecies understanding. It is in this spirit that we have agreed to participate in the Terran Initiative for Galactic Higher Education." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Humans, or Deathworlders, as they were often called, had only recently joined the galactic community. Their homeworld, Earth, was classified as a Category 12 death trap, and their species was known for its bizarre mix of ingenuity and recklessness. "I understand your concerns," Zorlax continued, raising two of his 6 hands in a placating gesture. "But I assure you, the human instructor comes highly recommended. Professor Aki Wong is an expert in what they call controlled demolitions, and will be teaching a course on basic explosives handling." The murmur turned into a cacophony of alarmed chirps, whistles, and telepathic exclamations. Professor Xylith, a sentient fungal colony, pulsed an angry shade of crimson. "Dean Zorlax, surely you jest. Explosives. In an academic setting. It's preposterous." Zorlax sighed, his exoskeleton creaking with the motion. "I understand your reservations, Professor Xylith, but the Terran ambassador assures me that this is considered a basic life skill on Earth. Apparently, they use explosives for everything from construction to entertainment." The faculty exchanged bewildered looks. Professor Gax, a gelatinous being from the methane swamps of Epsilon Eridani, burbled in confusion. "Entertainment. They explode things for fun." Before Zorlax could respond, a thunderous boom shook the Grand Hall, causing several of the more skittish faculty members to instinctively activate their defense mechanisms. Sylith released a cloud of spores. Gax formed protective bubbles around his most vital organelles, and Professor Kisk, an arachnoid mathematician, scuttled up the nearest wall. The massive doors at the end of the hall burst open, revealing a compact figure silhouetted against the bright Centauri daylight. As the dust settled, the figure strode forward, revealing a human woman of average height, with close-cropped black hair and a mischievous glint in her dark eyes. "Sorry about that, folks," she called out cheerfully, her voice carrying easily across the stunned silence. "Thought I'd make an entrance worthy of the occasion. Name's Aki Wong, your new explosives expert. Hope I didn't startle anyone too badly." Dean Zorlax, who had instinctively flattened himself against the floor, slowly rose to his full height. "Professor Wong, I presume," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "We, weren't expecting you for another solar rotation." Aki grinned, revealing surprisingly sharp teeth. "Oh, you know how it is with faster-than-light travel. Sometimes you arrive before you've left. Figured I'd pop in early and get a feel for the place." She glanced around the hall, taking in the varied alien life forms with undisguised fascination. "Quite the menagerie you've got here, Dean. This is going to be fun." Professor Xylith, still pulsing in agitated red, extended a mycelial tendril towards Aki. "Professor Wong, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, I must protest the very notion of teaching explosives to our students. It's simply too dangerous." Aki's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Dangerous? Nah, that's the beauty of it. Once you understand the principles, explosives are as safe as, well, maybe not as safe as milk, but definitely safer than driving a hovercar." She paused, considering. "Do you folks have hovercars? Or milk, for that matter?" Before anyone could respond, Aki clapped her hands together, producing a sound like a small thunderclap. Several faculty members flinched. "Right. No time like the present. Why don't you show me to my classroom, and we can get this party started?" Dean Zorlax exchanged a worried glance with his colleagues. Ah, Professor Wong, perhaps we should discuss the curriculum first, and the safety protocols, and the insurance forms. Aki waved a hand dismissively. Paperwork, schmaperwork. I've got a crate of demo materials arriving any minute now, and I'm itching to show these kids what Terran ingenuity is all about. She strode purposefully towards the exit, leaving the bewildered faculty in her wake. As the door closed behind her, Professor Gax oozed closer to Dean Zorlax. I fear we may have made a terrible mistake, he burbled softly. Zorlax could only nod in mute agreement. Meanwhile, in the student dormitories, word of the new human professor had spread like wildfire. Zix 427, a hive-minded insectoid, buzzed excitedly to his roommate, Gloop, a amorphous being from a low-gravity world. Can you believe it, Gloop? A real live Deathworlder, here to teach us. Zix's compound eyes glittered with anticipation. Gloop rippled anxiously, forming pseudopods that gesticulated wildly. But Zix, haven't you heard the stories? Humans are crazy. They voluntarily jump out of perfectly good aircraft for fun. They intentionally ingest neurotoxins for pleasure. And now they want to teach us about explosives. Zix's antennae quivered dismissively. Oh, come on, Gloop. Those are just exaggerations. I'm sure the stories about humans are greatly exaggerated. Besides, this is a university. How dangerous could it possibly be? At that moment, a tremor shook the dormitory, causing Gloop to instinctively form a protective sphere around himself. Zix clung to the ceiling, his wings buzzing in alarm. What was that? Gloop burbled nervously. Zix peered out the window, his compound eyes widening at the sight of a small mushroom cloud rising from the direction of the science complex. I think that might have been our new professor. In the aftermath of Aki's explosive arrival, Dean Zorlax found himself in the unenviable position of damage control. He stood before the University Board of Overseers, a collection of the most esteemed minds from across the galaxy, trying to explain the situation. Members of the board, Zorlax began, his exoskeleton pale with stress. I assure you that the incident upon Professor Wong's arrival was merely a cultural misunderstanding. On Earth, it seems, such displays are considered a form of greeting. The overseer from Betelgeuse, a being of pure energy contained within a force field, pulsed skeptically. A greeting that damages university property and traumatizes half the faculty. Dean Zorlax, we agreed to this exchange program to foster understanding, not to invite chaos into our hallowed halls of learning. Zorlax wrung his hands nervously. I understand your concerns, esteemed overseer, but perhaps we should view this as an opportunity. After all, humans have achieved remarkable technological progress in a fraction of the time it took other species. Their unique perspective could be invaluable to our students. The Jovian overseer, a gas giant consciousness transferred into a humanoid avatar, rumbled thoughtfully. The dean raises a valid point. Humans are known for their ability to improvise and adapt. Such skills could prove useful to our graduates in an ever-changing galaxy. As the board debated, Aki Wong was busy setting up her classroom. She hummed cheerfully to herself as she unpacked crates labeled with warning symbols that would have sent most species running for the nearest escape pod. Let's see, she muttered, arranging various devices on her desk. Plasma detonators, check. Quantum destabilizers, check. Ooh, and can't forget the good old-fashioned TNT. She patted a suspiciously ticking box affectionately. A tentative knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Come in, Aki called out, not looking up from her work. The door slid open to reveal a nervous-looking alien student. It was Zix 427, his antennae twitching with a mix of fear and curiosity. Excuse me, Professor Wong. I'm Zix 427, one of your students for the upcoming term. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the course. Aki's face lit up with a grin that would have been charming if it weren't for the manic glint in her eyes. Well, hello there, Zix 427. Always glad to see an eager student. Come on in, just watch your step. Some of this stuff is a bit sensitive. Zix cautiously entered the room, his compound eyes taking in the array of strange and terrifying devices scattered about. I was just wondering what exactly we'll be learning in this course. The curriculum description was rather vague. Aki chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Zix's exoskeleton. Oh, just the basics. How to safely handle explosives, the chemistry behind different types of blasting agents, proper demolition techniques. Nothing too fancy. Zix's mandibles clicked nervously. And, is all of this really considered basic on Earth? Aki waved a hand dismissively. Oh, sure. This is kid stuff back home. You should see what we teach in the advanced courses. She picked up what looked like a simple metal sphere. Now this little beauty here is what we call a gravity bomb. It creates a localized singularity that can tear apart the very fabric of space-time. Neat, huh? Zix found himself backing slowly towards the door. That's certainly interesting, Professor. I look forward to learning more in class. From a safe distance, behind several layers of shielding. As Zix scurried out of the classroom, he nearly collided with Dean Zorlax, who was approaching with a determined look on his face. Ah, Professor Wong, Zorlax said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. I was hoping we could discuss some minor adjustments to your curriculum, perhaps focusing more on the theoretical aspects of explosives rather than the practical applications. Aki's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile remained firmly in place. Now, Dean, you didn't bring me all the way across the galaxy to bore these kids with theory, did you? Don't worry, I've got everything under control. By the time I'm done with them, your students will be the envy of the galaxy. As Aki turned back to her preparations, humming a jaunty tune, Dean Zorlax couldn't shake the feeling that he had just signed the death warrant for his beloved university. Little did he know, the true chaos was yet to begin. First impressions. The lecture hall was packed to capacity, a sea of diverse alien life forms buzzing with nervous energy. Word of Professor Wong's explosive arrival had spread quickly, and curiosity had overcome fear for many of the students. Zix 427 sat near the front, his compound eyes fixed on the door, while Gloop quivered anxiously beside him. I can't believe you talked me into this, Gloop burbled, his amorphous form rippling with each anxious thought. We're going to get vaporized, I just know it. Zix's antennae twitched in excitement. Come on, Gloop. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. How often do you get to learn from a real Deathworlder? Before Gloop could respond, the doors burst open with a thunderous bang. Several students instinctively activated defensive measures. Translucent shields flickered to life, bioluminescent warning patterns flashed, and more than a few released involuntary bursts of pheromones. Professor Aki Wong strode in, a manic grin on her face and a suspicious-looking briefcase in her hand. Good morning, class. She called out cheerfully. Or is it afternoon? I'm still getting used to this planet's rotation. Anyway, welcome to Explosives 101. Things that go boom. She reached the front of the classroom and set her briefcase down with a metallic thunk that echoed ominously through the room. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Eki continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. Why in the galaxy would anyone need to know about explosives? Well, let me tell you, my extraterrestrial friends, explosives are the unsung heroes of human civilization. Aki launched into a rapid-fire lecture, her words punctuated by wild gesticulations and the occasional small detonation for emphasis. Think about it. We use explosives for mining, construction, demolition, scientific research, and even art. Heck, we wouldn't have made it off our planet without the controlled explosions we call rockets. As she spoke, holographic displays flickered to life around her, showing scenes from Earth's history, towering skyscrapers being demolished in controlled implosions, fireworks lighting up night skies, and spacecraft launching in pillars of fire. Zix watched in fascination, his multiple hearts racing with excitement. Beside him, Gloop had formed a protective bubble around himself, peeking out cautiously. "Now," Eki said, rubbing her hands together with glee, "who's ready for a little demonstration?" A collective gasp went through the room. Eki reached for her briefcase, and several students began edging towards the exits. "Oh, relax," she chuckled, opening the case to reveal an array of small, colorful objects. "We're starting small today. These are what we humans call firecrackers, mostly harmless, but great for teaching the basics of explosive reactions." She held up a tiny red cylinder. "This little guy contains a small amount of flash powder. When ignited, it creates a rapid exothermic reaction, resulting in a loud bang and a bright flash. Watch closely." Before anyone could protest, Eki had lit the firecracker with a small plasma torch. She tossed it casually into a transparent containment field at the front of the room. A second later, there was a sharp crack and a burst of light. The reaction from the class was instantaneous and varied. Zix buzzed with excitement, his wings vibrating so fast they became a blur. Gloop, startled by the noise, lost cohesion and splattered across his desk before slowly reforming. In the back of the room, a crystalline being from Rachel VII developed a series of stressed fractures across its surface. "Wasn't that fun?" Eki beamed, seemingly oblivious to the chaos she had caused. "Now let's talk about the chemistry behind that little pop." For the next hour, Eki led the class through a whirlwind tour of basic explosive compounds, their properties, and their various applications. Despite their initial fear, many of the students found themselves drawn in by her infectious enthusiasm and the undeniable depth of her knowledge. "Remember," Eki said as she wrapped up the lecture, "respect for these materials is key. Explosives aren't toys. Well, except when they are, like fireworks. But you get my point. Treat them with care, understand the science, and you'll be fine." Probably. As the students filed out of the classroom, a mix of emotions rippled through the crowd. Some were exhilarated, others terrified, but all were talking animatedly about what they had just experienced. Zix buzzed happily as he and Gloop made their way back to the dormitories. "That was amazing," he chittered. "Did you see how she made that tiny explosion? And the way she explained the chemical reactions? It's like poetry, but with more fire." Gloop, who had finally managed to maintain a stable form, oozed along beside his friend. "I have to admit," he burbled reluctantly, "it was more interesting than I expected. But I'm not sure my molecular structure can handle many more surprises like that firecracker." As they turned a corner, they nearly collided with Dean Zorlax, who was hurrying towards the lecture hall with a harried expression. "Oh, hello, Dean Zorlax," Zix greeted cheerfully. "Isn't Professor Wong wonderful? I've never been so excited about chemistry before." Zorlax's exoskeleton paled slightly. "Ah, yes, quite wonderful," he managed. "Tell me, was there any significant damage to the lecture hall?" Gloop rippled in what might have been a shrug. "Just some scorch marks on the containment field, I think. And maybe a few stress fractures in Krista from Rigel VI." Zorlax's relief was palpable. "Oh, thank the cosmic constants. When I heard the explosions, I feared the worst." He straightened up, trying to regain his dignified demeanor. "Well, I'm glad you found the lecture educational. Carry on, students." As Zorlax hurried off, Zix turned to Gloop. "You know, I think this course might be the best thing that's ever happened to this university. It's about time we had some excitement around here." Gloop gurgled skeptically. "Just wait until the practical exams. I have a feeling excitement might be an understatement." Meanwhile, in her makeshift laboratory adjacent to the lecture hall, Eki was already preparing for the next class. She hummed to herself as she carefully measured out compounds and adjusted equipment, occasionally pausing to scribble notes in a battered notebook. A tentative knock at the door interrupted her work. "Come in," she called out, not looking up from the delicate operation of calibrating a plasma initiator. The door slid open to reveal Professor Xylith, the fungal colony who had expressed such vehement opposition to Aki's course. His mycelial network pulsed with a mix of colors that Aki interpreted as nervousness and curiosity. "Ah, Professor Xylith," Aki greeted warmly. "Come to check out my setup. I promise I'm following all the safety protocols. Well, most of them. The important ones, anyway." Violet's colors shifted to a deeper hue of concern. "Professor Wong, I must admit, I had my doubts about your course. Many doubts, in fact. But after observing your lecture today, I find myself intrigued." Aki's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Well, color me shocked. And here I thought you were going to try to shut me down. What changed your mind?" Xylith's tendrils waved in a gesture that might have been embarrassment. "Your passion for the subject is infectious, and I cannot deny the elegant simplicity of some of the reactions you demonstrated. It has made me curious about how such principles might apply to my own field of xenobotany." A slow grin spread across Aki's face. "Oh, my fungal friend, have I got some ideas for you. Ever heard of nitrogen-fixing explosives? They can do wonders for soil enrichment. And don't get me started on the potential applications for spore dispersal." As Aki launched into an enthusiastic explanation, complete with hastily sketched diagrams and the occasional small explosion for emphasis, Xylith found himself drawn in despite his initial reservations. By the time he left the laboratory an hour later, his mycelial network was pulsing with excitement, and his mind was buzzing with new research ideas. Word of Professor Wong's unorthodox but engaging teaching style spread quickly through the university. By the end of the week, her class had become the talk of the campus. Students from other departments began to find excuses to pass by the lecture hall during her classes, hoping to catch a glimpse, or more likely, hear an explosion, of the infamous human professor in action. Even some of the faculty, initially skeptical and afraid, began to show interest. Professor Gax, the gelatinous mathematician, approached Aki one day after class. "Professor Wong," he burbled hesitantly, "I couldn't help but overhear your lecture on shaped charges. The mathematics involved in calculating precise detonation patterns is fascinating. I wonder if you might be interested in collaborating on a paper exploring the topological implications of multidimensional explosive wavefronts." Aki's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Professor Gax, my gelatinous genius, I thought you'd never ask. I've got some ideas about hyperbolic detonation sequences that'll blow your mind. Figuratively speaking, of course. Mostly. As unlikely collaborations formed and students from diverse species found common ground in their shared excitement and terror of Professor Wong's classes, a strange transformation began to take place at the Galactic University of Sciences. The rigid boundaries between departments began to blur, and a new spirit of interdisciplinary cooperation emerged. Dean Zorlax, watching this transformation with a mixture of awe and trepidation, couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, inviting this explosive human to their campus hadn't been such a terrible mistake after all. But as he watched Aki demonstrating what she called a minor thermobaric event to a group of wide-eyed students in the quad, he made a mental note to update the university's insurance policy. Again, the first few weeks of Professor Wong's course had certainly made an impression, but little did anyone know that the real fireworks were yet to come. As Aki prepared for her first practical lab session, the entire university held its breath, wondering what explosive surprises the human Deathworlder had in store for them next. Hands-on learning. The day of Professor Wong's first practical lab session dawned with an air of nervous anticipation. Students gathered outside the newly constructed controlled demolition arena, a reinforced dome on the outskirts of the campus that Dean Zorlax had reluctantly approved after much insistence from Aki. Zix 427 buzzed excitedly, his wings vibrating with barely contained enthusiasm. Beside him, Gloop oozed anxiously, his amorphous form rippling with each nervous thought. "I can't believe we're actually going to handle explosives," Zix chittered. "This is going to be amazing." Gloop formed a pseudopod that approximated a skeptical shake of the head. I still think this is a terrible idea. Did you see the waivers we had to sign? I'm pretty sure one of the clauses mentioned accidental dimensional rifts. Before Zix could respond, the massive doors of the arena slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Professor Aki Wong stood in the entrance, wearing a lab coat covered in scorch marks and a pair of goggles pushed up on her forehead. "Welcome, future demolitions experts," she called out cheerfully. "Who's ready to make some craters?" The students filed in, a mix of excitement and trepidation on their faces, or equivalent sensory organs. The interior of the arena was a vast open space, with various obstacles and structures scattered about. At the center stood a large table covered in an assortment of devices and materials that made several students instinctively activate their defense mechanisms. "All right, gang," Heki began, clapping her hands together. "Today we're going to put theory into practice. You've learned about different types of explosives, detonation methods, and safety protocols. Now it's time to apply that knowledge." She gestured to the table. "I've set up a series of challenges around the arena. Working in teams, you'll need to use the tools and materials provided to overcome each obstacle. Remember, the goal isn't just to make the biggest boom. It's about precision, control, and understanding the properties of your materials." The students exchanged nervous glances as Aki began dividing them into teams. Zix found himself grouped with Gloop, Krista, the crystalline being from Rigel VI, who had developed stress fractures during the first class, and Kisk, the arachnoid mathematician. "All right, Team Kaboom," Aki announced, grinning at the group. "Your first challenge is over there." She pointed to a large metallic cube with a small opening on one side. Inside that cube is a delicate sensor. Your job is to create a precisely controlled explosion that will open the cube without damaging the sensor. Think you can handle it? Zix's antennae quivered with excitement. "Absolutely, Professor. We won't let you down." As the teams dispersed to their respective challenges, Aki's voice rang out one last time. "Remember, folks, respect the boom. And the boom will respect you. Probably." Team Kaboom gathered around their challenge, eyeing the metallic cube warily. "Okay, team," Zix buzzed, taking charge. "Let's approach this systematically. Kisk, can you calculate the optimal placement and yield for our explosive charge?" Kisk's multiple eyes blinked in sequence as he scuttled around the cube, measuring and calculating. "Affirmative. Based on the cube's composition and the estimated location of the sensor, I recommend a shake charge placed precisely 2.7 centimeters from the left edge of the opening, with a yield of no more than 15 grams TNT equivalent." Krista, her crystalline surface still showing faint stress lines, chimed in. "I can use my refraction abilities to help focus the blast wave, minimizing collateral damage." Gloop, still nervous but caught up in the excitement, burbled, "And I can form a protective barrier around the sensor once we've breached the cube, just in case." The team set to work, carefully preparing their explosive charge under Zix's direction. As they worked, other teams around the arena were tackling their own challenges with varying degrees of success. Occasional small explosions and yelps of surprise echoed through the dome. Finally, Team Kaboom was ready. They placed their carefully crafted charge, and everyone took cover behind a protective barrier. 3, 2, 1, detonate, Zix called out. There was a sharp crack, followed by the screech of tearing metal. As the smoke cleared, the team peered anxiously at their handiwork. The cube had split open cleanly, revealing the delicate sensor inside, completely undamaged. "We did it." Zix buzzed triumphantly, his wings vibrating so fast they became a blur. Even Gloop seemed excited, his form rippling with joy. "I can't believe it actually worked." Their celebration was short-lived, however. A sudden tremor shook the arena, followed by a series of increasingly loud booms. "Oh," came Professor Wong's voice from across the room. "That's not supposed to happen." The source of the disturbance quickly became apparent. In the center of the arena, a swirling vortex of energy was forming, growing larger by the second. "It's a runaway reaction," Uki shouted, her usual grin replaced by a look of concern. "One of the experimental compounds must have destabilized." Panic spread through the students. Some ran for the exits, while others froze in terror. Zix looked at his teammates, seeing his own fear reflected in their expressions. "We have to do something," he chittered. "Professor Wong taught us about chain reactions. If we don't stop this now, it could tear apart the whole university." Kisk's eyes darted rapidly, calculating. If we could create a counter-explosion, precisely timed and placed, we might be able to disrupt the vortex's energy pattern. Krista's crystalline surface vibrated with nervous energy. But how? We'd need an enormous amount of explosive power, far more than what we have here. Gloop, surprisingly, was the one who provided the solution. "Wait. Remember what Professor Wong said about chemical interactions? What if we combine all the remaining materials to create one supercharged explosive?" Zix's antennae perked up. "Gloop, you're a genius. But it'll be incredibly dangerous. One miscalculation, and we could make things even worse." The team looked at each other, a moment of understanding passing between them. They were the only ones who could stop this. "Let's do it," Zix said firmly. As the vortex grew, threatening to engulf the entire arena, Team Kaboom sprang into action. They raced from station to station, gathering materials and combining them under Kisk's precise calculations. Aki, seeing what they were doing, shouted encouragement. "That's it, kids. Show that interdimensional rift who's boss." With time running out, the team finished their makeshift super explosive. Krista used her refractive properties to create a focusing lens, while Gloop formed himself into a protective casing around the volatile mixture. "It's now or never," Zix buzzed. "Ketsk, where do we need to detonate this?" The arachnoid mathematician pointed with several legs. "There, at the base of the vortex, 47 degrees from our current position." With a mighty effort, the team launched their creation towards the swirling mass of energy. As it flew, Zix activated the detonator. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. Then, with a flash brighter than a supernova and a boom that shook the very foundations of the university, their homemade bomb exploded. The shockwave knocked everyone off their feet, or equivalent appendages. When they could finally see again, the vortex was gone, leaving behind only a scorched circle on the arena floor. Silence fell over the dome, broken only by the sound of falling debris and the faint sizzle of cooling metal. Then, from the center of the arena, came a sound that grew steadily louder: laughter. Professor Aki Wong emerged from behind a protective barrier, covered in soot, but grinning wider than ever. "Now that," she exclaimed, "is what I call hands-on learning." The students stared at her in disbelief for a moment, then slowly, tentatively, began to laugh too. The tension of the moment broke, replaced by a giddy sense of relief and accomplishment. Aki strode over to Team Kaboom, who were still huddled together, looking shell-shocked but proud. "Outstanding work, team," she beamed. "Quick thinking, excellent application of principles, and perfect teamwork. I couldn't have done it better myself." She paused, considering. Well, maybe a little better, but not much. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The arena was a disaster zone, with scorch marks, debris, and a lingering smell of exotic chemicals filling the air. Dean Zorlax, alerted by the commotion, came rushing in, his exoskeleton pale with shock. "What in the name of all that's mathematically probable happened here?" he exclaimed, taking in the scene of destruction. Aki threw an arm around the dean's shoulders, ignoring his flinch. "Just a little unexpected learning opportunity. Zorlax, old boy. You should be proud. Your students just saved the university from being sucked into an interdimensional rift. I'd say that deserves extra credit, wouldn't you?" As Zorlax sputtered, trying to form a coherent response, Aki turned back to the students. "All right, Gang, class dismissed. But before you go, I want a 5-page report on the chemical interactions you observed during this little adventure. And remember, in the world of explosives, there are no accidents, only unexpected results. The students filed out, buzzing with excitement and still slightly dazed. Zix turned to his teammates. "You know," he chittered, "I think I'm starting to understand why humans have such a reputation in the galaxy." Gloop, who had finally managed to reform into a stable shape, burbled in agreement. "They're completely insane, but I have to admit, it's rather exhilarating." As they left the arena, already beginning to discuss their report, none of them noticed Professor Wong slipping a small, innocuous-looking device into her pocket, a device that bore a striking resemblance to a remote detonator. Aki watched the students leave, a mixture of pride and mischief in her eyes. "Well," she muttered to herself, "that went even better than I expected. Can't wait to see what they do with the really dangerous stuff." As the dust settled on their first practical lab session, the students of Explosives 101 realized that their adventure was only just beginning. And somewhere in the depths of space, the legends of the crazy human professor and her even crazier students began to spread, adding another chapter to the myth of the Deathworlders. The final exam. The weeks following the interdimensional incident, as it had come to be known, passed in a blur of increasingly complex lessons, minor explosions, and rapidly evolving safety protocols. Dean Zorlax had taken to carrying antacid tablets with him at all times, his exoskeleton permanently tinged with a stress-induced pallor. As the end of the term approached, a palpable tension settled over the campus. Professor Wong's final exam was the subject of wild speculation, and not a small amount of terror among the student body. The night before the exam, Zix 427 paced nervously in his dormitory room, his wings buzzing with anxiety. Gloop watched from his containment pod, his amorphous form rippling with concern. "What do you think she's going to make us do?" Zix chittered, pausing to look out the window at the twin moons of Centauri Prime. "Detonate a small moon. Redesign a supernova." Gloop burbled thoughtfully. Knowing Professor Wong, it could be anything. Remember last week when she taught us how to make ice cream using liquid nitrogen and high explosives? Zix's antennae twitched at the memory. "I still can't look at dessert the same way, but you have to admit it was delicious." As the two friends speculated about the upcoming exam, similar scenes played out across the campus. In the crystalline dorms, Krista vibrated at a frequency that threatened to shatter her neighbors. Kisk, the arachnoid mathematician, had covered every surface of his room with complex explosive yield calculations. Morning arrived all too quickly. The students gathered outside the controlled demolition arena, which had been extensively repaired and reinforced since the incident. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the faint smell of ozone, a common side effect of prolonged exposure to Professor Wong's teaching methods. The arena doors slid open, revealing not the expected chaos of explosive materials and complex machinery, but a simple classroom setup. Professor Eki Wong stood at the front, her usual manic grin replaced by an uncharacteristically serious expression. "Welcome, students," she said as they filed in cautiously. "Please take a seat. And no, before you ask, the chairs are not rigged to explode. Probably." Once everyone was seated, Eki paced in front of the class, her eyes scanning the nervous faces before her. "Over the past term, you've learned about the principles of explosives, their applications, and most importantly, how to respect their power," she began. "You've survived accidents, averted disasters, and even saved the university from being sucked into another dimension. Not bad for a bunch of beginners." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But today, you face your greatest challenge yet. Today, you'll be taking your final exam." A collective gulp echoed through the room. "Now, I know what you're all thinking," Eki continued, a hint of her usual smile returning. "What insane, death-defying feat does the crazy human have planned for us? Well, prepare yourselves, Because this exam will test not just your knowledge, but your wisdom. She reached under her desk and pulled out a stack of papers. Your final exam is a written test. The silence that followed was so profound that you could have heard a subatomic particle drop. Then, all at once, the room erupted in a cacophony of confused alien vocalizations. A written test. Zix buzzed incredulously. But what about practical application? Gloop's form rippled with disbelief. No explosions. No interdimensional rifts to close. Aki held up her hands, waiting for the commotion to die down. I know. It's not what you expected. But here's the thing. Any fool can make something go boom. The real challenge is knowing when not to. She began distributing the test papers. This exam will present you with real-world scenarios. Your job is to analyze each situation and decide whether explosives are the right solution, and if so, how to use them safely and effectively. As the students stared at their papers in a mixture of relief and bewilderment, Eki continued, remember everything you've learned, not just the formulas and techniques, but the principles. Respect for the power you're wielding, the importance of precision, and above all, the understanding that sometimes the best solution is to walk away. For the next 3 hours, the arena was filled with the sound of scratching pens or equivalent writing implements, and the occasional muffled exclamation as students grappled with the complex scenarios presented to them. Zix found himself unexpectedly engaged, his multiple hearts racing as he worked through each problem. One question asked how to safely dispose of an unstable xenon-based compound. Another presented a delicate archaeological site that needed to be excavated without damaging priceless artifacts. Gloop oozed over his paper, his gelatinous form elongating and contracting as he considered each answer carefully. He found himself drawing on not just Professor Wong's lessons, but on principles from his other classes: biology, physics, even philosophy. As the exam progressed, a strange realization began to dawn on the students. This test wasn't just about explosives. It was about problem-solving, critical thinking, and ethical decision-making. Professor Wong had taught them far more than how to make things go boom. Finally, Aki called time. As she collected the papers, she couldn't help but notice the looks of intense concentration and, surprisingly, satisfaction on many of her students' faces. All right, gang, she announced. That's it for the written portion. But we're not done yet. A ripple of nervous excitement ran through the class. For the final part of your exam, Eki continued, her eyes twinkling with mischief, I have a little surprise planned. Meet me at the university's old particle accelerator in 1 hour, and bring your thinking caps. You're going to need them. As the students filed out, buzzing with speculation about what Professor Wong had in store for them, Aki couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. These kids had come a long way from the terrified bunch that had first entered her classroom. An hour later, the class gathered at the entrance to the defunct particle accelerator, a massive ring-shaped structure that had fallen into disuse years ago when the university upgraded to more advanced quantum tunneling technology. Aki stood before them, practically vibrating with excitement. All right, future demolitions experts, here's the situation. This old accelerator is slated for demolition to make way for a new xenobiology lab. Your job is to bring it down, safely, efficiently, and with style. The students exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and apprehension on their faces. But here's the catch. Eki continued, her grin widening. You'll be working as one big team, and you have to use everything you've learned. Not just about explosives, but about teamwork, problem-solving, and thinking outside the box. She gestured to a table laden with an assortment of materials, some explosive, some not. You have all these resources at your disposal, plus anything else you can scrounge up on campus. You have 2 hours to plan and execute your demolition. Oh, and one more thing. Points will be awarded for creativity. With that, Eki stepped back, leaving the stunned students to contemplate the enormous task before them. For a moment, No one moved. Then, slowly, Zix's antennae began to twitch with excitement. "Okay, team," he buzzed, taking charge. "Let's approach this systematically. Kisk, can you start calculating optimal explosive placement?" The arachnoid mathematician scuttled forward, his eyes already darting as he ran complex equations in his head. "Krista," Zix continued, "your crystalline structure gives you unique insight into material stress points. Can you identify the key structural weaknesses?" Krista's surface shimmered with enthusiasm. On it, gloop, Zix turned to his amorphous friend. "Your ability to change shape could be invaluable for placing charges in hard-to-reach spots. Are you up for it?" Gloop rippled affirmatively. "I was born ready." "Well, born might not be the right word, but you get the idea." As the students began to work, a remarkable transformation took place. Species that had once eyed each other warily now collaborated with enthusiasm. Ideas flowed freely, each alien contributing their unique perspective and abilities to the task at hand. They didn't just plan a simple demolition, they designed a spectacular show. Krista suggested using her refractive properties to create a dazzling light display as the accelerator came down. Ketz calculated a sequence of precisely timed detonations that would cause the structure to collapse in a graceful spiral. Gloop, in a stroke of inspiration, proposed using the accelerator's own electromagnetic coils to enhance the explosive effect, turning the entire ring into one massive shaped charge. As the 2-hour mark approached, the team put the finishing touches on their plan. Explosives were carefully placed, non-explosive components were rigged, and every student knew their role in the complex demolition dance they had choreographed. Aki watched from a safe distance, her face unreadable behind protective goggles. Dean Zorlax stood beside her, nervously chewing on his antacid tablets. "Are you sure this is safe, Professor Wong?" he chittered anxiously. Aki's grin was audible in her voice. "Safe? Probably not. Awesome. Absolutely." As the final seconds ticked down, the students took their positions. Zix, as the de facto leader, stood ready at the main detonator. "Ready, everyone," he called out. A chorus of affirmatives rang out in various alien languages. 3, 2, 1, initiate. What followed was a symphony of destruction that would be talked about on Centauri Prime for generations to come. The accelerator ring lit up with a dazzling display of lights, each section glowing briefly before collapsing in a perfectly timed sequence. The electromagnetic coils, repurposed as the world's largest shaped charge, directed the explosive force with pinpoint accuracy. Debris fell in graceful arcs, forming intricate patterns on the ground. As the dust settled, the old particle accelerator was no more. In its place stood a piece of impromptu explosive art, the fallen debris arranged in a shape that, from above, resembled the universal symbol for atomic structure. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, from beside the stunned Dean Zorlax, came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Professor Eki Wong strode forward, her face split by the widest grin anyone had ever seen. "Now, Diet," she announced, "is what I call demolition." The students, covered in dust but beaming with pride, gathered around their teacher. "You did it, kids," Aki said, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "You didn't just pass an exam. You proved that you understand the true nature of explosives. It's not about destruction. It's about transformation. Taking something old and turning it into something new. And most importantly, you did it together." As the students celebrated their success, Dean Zorlax approached, his exoskeleton still pale, but his eyes wide with amazement. "Professor Wong," he said, his voice trembling slightly, I must admit, I had my doubts about this course. Many, many doubts. But seeing this," he gestured to the artful destruction before them, "I begin to understand why humans have achieved so much in such a short time. Your species' ability to see potential for creation in the midst of destruction is remarkable." Aki's grin softened into a genuine smile. "Thank you, Dean. That means a lot." She turned back to her students. "All right, gang, class dismissed. And remember, whether you're building or demolishing, always do it with passion, precision, and a healthy respect for the boom." Lasting impact. As the dust settled on the spectacular final exam, the Galactic University of Sciences found itself irrevocably changed. The story of the human professor and her explosive lessons had spread far beyond the campus, reaching the farthest corners of the known galaxy. In the weeks following the end of the term, Dean Zorlax's office was flooded with inquiries from other institutions, all eager to implement their own versions of Professor Wong's course. The dean, who had once viewed the class as a potential disaster, now found himself proudly extolling its virtues to his peers. Yes, he chittered into his holographic communicator, addressing the dean of the Betelgeusian Academy of Higher Learning. "Professor Wong's methods are unconventional, to say the least, but the results speak for themselves. Our students have shown remarkable improvements in problem-solving, teamwork, and interdisciplinary thinking, and our insurance premiums have only tripled." Meanwhile, the students who had survived and thrived in Explosives 101 were discovering that their newfound skills were in high demand. Job offers poured in from across the galaxy as various species sought to harness the unique blend of knowledge and creativity that Professor Wong had instilled in her pupils. Zix 427, to no one's surprise, had been offered a prestigious internship with the Galactic Corps of Engineers. As he packed his belongings, his wings buzzing with excitement, he turned to Gloop, who was helping in his own gelatinous way. "Can you believe it, Gloop?" Zix chittered, his compound eyes gleaming. 6 months ago, I couldn't tell a plasma detonator from a particle accelerator. Now I'm off to help design the next generation of space stations." Gloop rippled with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "You've come a long way, Zix. Just promise me you won't blow up any solar systems without running the calculations at least twice, okay?" As for Gloop himself, he had received an unexpected offer from a cutting-edge research facility specializing in adaptive materials. His unique experiences in Professor Wong's class, combined with his natural ability to change shape and density, made him an ideal candidate for developing new types of reactive armor and smart materials. Who would have thought? Gloop burbled as he prepared for his departure, that nearly being vaporized on a weekly basis would lead to a promising career in materials science. Krista, whose crystalline structure had become remarkably resilient after repeated exposure to Professor Wong's teaching aids, had been recruited by a prestigious jewelry design firm. Her ability to manipulate her own molecular structure, combined with her newfound knowledge of controlled micro-explosions, promised to revolutionize the field of gem cutting and shaping. Kesk, the arachnoid mathematician, found himself in high demand among various space agencies. His complex calculations, honed by the need to precisely control explosive yields, were now being applied to plot ultra-efficient spacecraft trajectories and design new types of fusion reactors. But perhaps the most surprising development came from an unexpected quarter. Professor Xylith, the fungal colony who had initially been Professor Wong's most vocal opponent, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Inspired by the principles he had observed in Explosives 101, Xylith had begun experimenting with controlled chemical reactions in plant growth. His groundbreaking work on explosive pollination techniques promised to revolutionize agriculture on resource-poor worlds. As news of these developments spread, the Galactic University of Sciences found its application rates soaring. Students from across the cosmos clamored for a chance to study under the now legendary Professor Wong. Amid all this excitement, Aki Wong herself was conspicuously absent. Rumors abounded about her whereabouts. Some said she had been recruited for a top-secret government project. Others claimed she was off exploring uncharted regions of space in search of new and exciting things to explode. The truth, as it turned out, was somewhat less dramatic, but no less impactful. On a small, uninhabited moon in a nearby star system, The lone figure stood before a massive apparatus that looked suspiciously like a combination of a particle accelerator, a volcano, and a fireworks factory. Ike Wong, her lab coat scorched and her goggles askew, grinned maniacally as she made some final adjustments to her creation. Beside her, a holographic projection of Dean Zorlax flickered nervously. "Professor Wong," the dean's image chittered, "are you absolutely certain this is necessary? The Board of Overseers is concerned about the potential ramifications of your research." Aki waved a hand dismissively, narrowly avoiding a spark from a nearby console. "Relax, Zorlax, old boy. This little experiment is going to revolutionize our understanding of quantum entanglement, terraforming, and pyrotechnics, all at the same time." She paused, considering. "Although you might want to evacuate any nearby solar systems, just as a precaution." As Dean Zorlax's hologram flickered out, his exoskeleton a pale shade of panic, Aki turned back to her work. Her time teaching at the university had been fun, but this, pushing the boundaries of science and safety protocols simultaneously, this was where she truly thrived. Back on Centauri Prime, as a new term began at the Galactic University of Sciences, the impact of Professor Wong's brief tenure continued to ripple outward. In the newly renovated and significantly reinforced lecture hall that had once housed Explosives 101, a fresh batch of students gathered nervously. At the front of the room stood not Eki Wong, but a familiar gelatinous form. "Welcome, everyone, to advanced interdisciplinary problem-solving," Gloop burbled, his amorphous body somehow managing to project an air of authority. "I'm Professor Gloop, and over the next term, we'll be exploring how the principles of various scientific disciplines, including but not limited to explosive chemistry, can be applied to solve complex galactic issues." As Gloop began his lecture, seamlessly morphing into different shapes to illustrate various concepts, the students found themselves drawn in by his unconventional approach. It wasn't quite the same as Professor Wong's class, but the spirit of innovation and controlled chaos lived on. Meanwhile, in the university's administrative offices, Dean Zorlax was engaged in a heated debate with the Board of Overseers. "I understand your concerns," he chittered, his exoskeleton flushed with agitation. "But the data speaks for itself. Since implementing Professor Wong's methods, our graduates have shown a 500% increase in creative problem-solving abilities, a 300% improvement in interdisciplinary collaboration, and yes, a 1,000% increase in minor explosions. But I assure you, they're all completely controlled and mostly intentional." The board members exchanged skeptical glances, but even they couldn't deny the results. The Galactic University of Sciences had shot to the top of intergalactic rankings, and its graduates were reshaping fields across the cosmos. As the meeting adjourned, Dean Zorlax found himself wondering, not for the first time, how a single human professor had managed to turn the entire galactic academic community on its head in just one term. But the true scale of Professor Wong's impact was perhaps best illustrated in a small, unassuming laboratory on the outskirts of the campus. There, Zix 427, back from his internship for a guest lecture, was demonstrating a new device to a group of wide-eyed students. "Now, pay attention." Zix buzzed excitedly, his wings vibrating with barely contained enthusiasm. "What you're about to see is the culmination of everything I learned from Professor Wong, combined with cutting-edge galactic engineering." He held up a small, innocuous-looking sphere. "This, my friends, is a quantum entanglement enhancer, or QEE for short. It uses precisely controlled micro-explosions to manipulate subatomic particles, allowing for instantaneous communication across vast distances." The students leaned in, their various sensory organs fixed on the device. "But here's the really exciting part," Six continued, his antennae twitching with excitement. "By applying Professor Wong's principles of creative demolition, we'd found a way to use the QEE to literally punch holes in the fabric of space-time, creating stable wormholes for near-instantaneous travel." As if on cue, The sphere in Zix's hand began to glow, emitting a soft humming sound. The air in the center of the lab shimmered and twisted, forming a swirling portal of energy. Now, who wants to be the first to step into a new era of galactic exploration? Zix asked, his compound eyes gleaming with the same manic enthusiasm that had often shone in Professor Wong's gaze. The students, rather than recoiling in fear as they might have once done, eagerly volunteered, each vying to be the first to experience this new marvel of explosive-assisted technology. As the first brave student stepped towards the portal, Zix couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude for the crazy human professor who had started it all. Somewhere out there in the vast cosmos, he knew HFY Wong was probably cooking up some new, even more outrageous experiment. And the galaxy, for better or worse, but mostly better, would never be the same. In the years that followed, the legend of Professor HFY Wong and her explosive teaching methods only grew. Across the galaxy, a new generation of scientists, engineers, and innovators emerged, all bearing the unmistakable mark of her influence. They were the ones who looked at impossible problems and saw opportunities for creative destruction. They were the ones who understood that sometimes the best way to build something new was to blow up the old. They were the ones who faced the unknown with a mix of rigorous calculation and gleeful recklessness that made their more traditional colleagues both envious and terrified. And on countless worlds, in laboratories and workshops, and top-secret research facilities, a new mantra could be heard, whispered with a mix of reverence and excited trepidation. What would Professor Wong do? The answer, invariably, involved explosions, but they were explosions that illuminated the darkness, that forged new paths through the cosmos, that brought species together in the shared joy of discovery and controlled destruction. HFY Wong had come to the Galactic University of Sciences to teach a simple course on explosives. She had left behind a legacy that would shape the future of galactic civilization for generations to come. And somewhere out there, amid the stars, her laughter could almost be heard, accompanied by the distant rumble of something very large going spectacularly, beautifully boom. The end, or perhaps just the beginning of a whole new kind of galactic fireworks show.